Hey Advaith, still browsing?
Oh hey, sorry, didn't notice you there. Today, we are going to begin the video with a little bit of a game. So tell me, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you look at this image? Chances are that you guessed Egypt, and that is our destination for today. Egypt's history is extremely long. So long, in fact, that the people who study Egypt have their own branch under history. And the branch is called Egyptology, and the people who study it are called Egyptologists. These Egyptologists have divided Egyptian history for us into certain periods, three of which we will be covering today. This is a flowchart showing all of the periods in Egyptian history. Please take a close look as this will come in handy throughout the Egypt episodes. The periods which have intermediate in their names are those which were in a state of anarchy, which means that no king ruled the place in that particular era. The ones which have kingdom in the end of their names are the golden eras in Egyptian history. With all of this knowledge in mind, let's move on with the episode. The first period in Egyptian history is the pre-dynastic period. During this period, hunter-gatherers began settling around the river Nile. These hunter-gatherers included Libyans, Nubians, and Semites. Libyans were descendants of early European humans, while the Nubians were from the warmer regions of Africa and the Semites were Asian. The pre-dynastic period is the entire period of time before 3150 BCE. During this period, Egypt developed at a different pace in two different regions, Upper and Lower Egypt. Confusingly enough, Upper Egypt was in the south, whereas Lower Egypt was in the north. This had a lot to do with the flowing pattern of the river Nile. It begins flowing in the south, where the altitude of the river is much higher. Then it slowly makes its way northwards, where the altitude begins to reduce. Hence, the south, where it begins to flow, becomes Upper Nile and Upper Egypt, and the north becomes Lower Nile and Lower Egypt. Lower Egypt would later be conquered by Upper Egypt, by the king Menes. And hence, the conquering of Lower Egypt by Upper Egypt in 3150 BCE began the dynastic period in Egypt, or more specifically, the early dynastic period. It is said that the kings of the early dynastic period invented the format of a calendar, though keep in mind that this claim is also shared by the Sumerians. A less known fact about Egypt, however, during this period was that the king just acted as a figurehead, which means that he was a symbol of power for the royal court and didn't actually perform any work within the kingdom. Instead, it was his minister, the vizier or wazir, who did all of the work. Also, continuing with the administration theme, they were probably the first to establish a capital. Their capital city was the city of Memphis. Originally, the city didn't actually have a name, and hence, when the Greek conquered it, they named it after the nearby pyramid, Men-Nefer. Hence, Memphis is the Greek translation of Men-Nefer. Interestingly, the city was actually called the White Wall because it was the first of its kind to use completely whitewashed bricks to build the homes and fortresses in the city. The early dynastic period saw the rule of the first and second dynasties. Their family chart went something like this. After the second dynasty came the third dynasty, of course, and with them they brought marvelous architecture and staggering political reforms, and hence ushered in the new era in Egyptian history, the Old Kingdom era. But this is where the historical controversy kicks in. Alternate views of historians suggest that the third dynasty did not begin the Old Kingdom era. In fact, people believe that the era lasted for only a third of how long it is said to have conventionally lasted. This has a lot to do with how we define this era. People link administrative reformations and architectural advancement with this period. Although these were present in the third dynasty, their reach and power is questionable. I'll try my best to explain this contradiction as we move on through the video. The first administrative reform introduced by the third dynasty was of nomes. Nomes were kind of like administrative city-states. Let's understand more about them by looking at the word's origin. The word nome or nomes is derived from the Greek word that is nomos, which means law. And hence the word nomes roughly means law enforcing regions. So they were somewhat like modern day districts and counties. Each nome was given a council and a vizier. So it kind of acted like an autonomous region on which the crown was supposed to have full control. But this adds to the first contention in our previous contradiction. You see, although these were pretty unique and definitely modern for the time reforms, their reach is questionable. Often, the king had zero control over these nomes. Nomes began making their own laws, which often violated the central code of law. So, these nomes were actually no longer doing their job of enforcing the law. So, dear viewers, let's ask ourselves, is a reform even a reform if it works theoretically but fails to perform practically? Well, I'm sure you'll all have answers for that in the comment section. And now, time for probably what is all of our favorite Egyptian thing, pyramids. The first king to have a pyramid built was King Zoser, who was the founder of the third dynasty. And the reason is quite interesting. The reason for building pyramids is closely linked to Egyptian religious beliefs. All kings had a fabled afterlife, which only they could enter, unlike the common people. But for the gods to know that you were a king, there has to be a distinction between you and the rest. Let me explain. So, think of it like this, if you will. Your state's chief minister is arriving to your city and they're staying at this really fancy restaurant or hotel. Consider this hotel or restaurant to be the afterlife. Now, obviously, for everyone in the city to know that it is the chief minister arriving, the chief minister is given a long convoy and the roads are blocked. Egyptian afterlife was similar. They wanted to block the roads to the afterlife and give a special convoy to the king. And for the king to get his own convoy, he must be buried in a special manner, along with all of his prized possessions. They believed that if the gods saw these possessions, they would be convinced that it was most definitely a king. And this special manner of burial was only allowed for the king. And hence, they blocked all the roads to the afterlife. And hence, they built the pyramids. These pyramids were architectural marvels. King Zoser hired his most skilled vizier, IMHOTEP, to do the job. It was the first structure to be built completely out of stone. But that paves the way for the second argument in our previous contradiction. You see, although the building material was new, the building method was not. They still used a primitive step construction method. Hence, this begs the question, the material or the mechanism, the team or the coach, the leaders or the ideology? Well, let's hear your views in the comments. As for me, I like to think of this third dynasty confusion as somewhat of a buffer between the pre-dynastic era and the Old Kingdom era. Historic changes do not happen overnight with the snap of a finger. They often take a lot of time to happen and hence it is hard to draw a perfect line between two eras. Hence, if we establish such buffer periods, the classification becomes easier for us. All of these instances tell us that history is a lot more than just dates and names. It's about the gray areas and the opinions. Things like these make history so much more interesting, and our aim at this channel is to show just that. So, let's summarize everything that we learned today. We learned about the periods in Egyptian history. Next, we looked at the origins of Upper and Lower Egypt and why they are called so. Next, we looked at the early dynastic period, after which we looked at the Egyptians claiming to have invented the format of a calendar. After that, we understood the system of a court in ancient Egypt, where there was a person called the vizier who took care of the business in the kingdom. Next, we looked at the Old Kingdom. Next, we looked at the Old Kingdom era, which is said to have started by the third dynasty. But that is where we learned about the historical controversy. And finally, we learned a little bit about what is probably all of our favorite Egyptian thing, pyramids. This will be the continued topic for the next video, as this is a huge topic. So stay tuned for that one. So if you enjoyed the video, then please make sure to like and subscribe and click the bell icon to remain notified. If you know someone who is interested in videos like these, then please do share these videos with them. And I'll see you in the next one.